Oh, how the mighty have fallen. The Galactic Council, that self-proclaimed bastion of civilization and order, sits trembling in their pristine chrome towers. And why, you ask? Because of... Wait for it. Baby animals. Yes, you heard correctly. The species that conquered half the galaxy, obliterated 3 different armadas and made the word human synonymous with run for your life across 47 star systems, has been brought to its knees by puppies. Let me back up. My name is Vorthak, Senior Intelligence Analyst for the Zephyrian Empire, and I've spent the last 20 rotations studying these bizarre creatures called humans. 20 rotations. Do you know what I could have accomplished in that time? I could have mastered 17 different forms of quantum mathematics, learned to play the ion harp, maybe even found a mate. Instead, I've been sitting here watching surveillance footage of humans doing the most incomprehensible things. The day everything changed started like any other. Admiral Crix was pacing around the command center, his 12 tentacles writhing with barely contained rage. The humans had just decimated our mining operation on Kepler 442 bid. Again, 3rd time this cycle. Our losses were significant. Vorthak, Crix bellowed, his voice echoing through the chamber like thunder in a metal drum. Tell me you have something. Anything. These humans are bleeding us dry. I adjusted my optical sensors and pulled up the latest intelligence reports. Well, sir, I do have some interesting findings. Interesting? Crix's eye stalks twisted toward me. Vorthak, our ships are floating debris, our soldiers are requesting transfers to the Outer Rim colonies, and you give me interesting? Here's the thing about humans that nobody tells you in the intelligence briefings. They're completely, utterly, magnificently insane. Not in the fun way like the Regellians, who at least have the courtesy to warn you before they start their berserker rages. No, humans are insane in a way that makes absolutely no logical sense. Take their military tactics, for instance. During the Battle of Proxima Station, when any reasonable species would have retreated after losing 60% of their fleet, what did humans do? They charged, actually charged, through a field of plasma mines, while singing. Their battle anthem was something called "Don't Stop Me Now," and apparently nothing was going to stop them. But that's not even the weird part. The weird part came 3 days later. I was monitoring human communications, trying to decode their strategic patterns, when I intercepted a transmission from Captain Lisa Morgan aboard the human dreadnought Defiance. Now, Captain Morgan was the same woman who had single-handedly boarded a Vorthak battle cruiser, fought through 17 decks of enemy soldiers, and personally planted the charges that turned their flagship into expensive fireworks. Terrifying, right? Absolutely. I'd rather face a pack of Andromedan deathworms than that woman in combat. But then I heard her talking to her crew about something called a rescue mission. Pare people, Morgan's voice crackled through the comm. We've got reports of survivors on the surface of Kepler 442b. Civilian transport went down during the evacuation. We're going in. Standard military operation. I thought, probably grabbing some high-value personnel or classified equipment. I was so very, very wrong. The Defiance descended through the atmosphere of that barren rock like a falling star. The planet's surface was a wasteland of twisted metal and smoking craters, courtesy of our recent bombardment. Any sane species would have written off the survivors as acceptable losses, but not humans. Oh no, not humans. Morgan led a team of 12 Marines to the crash site. I watched through our surveillance drones as they moved through the wreckage with the same deadly precision they'd shown in combat. Weapons ready, formation tight, every movement calculated for maximum efficiency. And then they found the survivors. It wasn't soldiers, it wasn't scientists or diplomats or anyone remotely important. It was a family, 2 adult humans and here's where my entire understanding of human psychology went sideways. 3 small humans, juveniles, cubs, if you will. But wait, there's more. Because the family had something with them, something that made 12 of the most dangerous soldiers in the galaxy freeze in their tracks. A basket, a small wicker basket, and inside that basket, oh my stars, one of the Marines whispered, his voice carrying over the comm. Look at them. Look at them. Inside the basket were 6 of the smallest, most pathetic creatures I had ever seen. They looked like miniature versions of Earth canines, barely larger than a human fist, with oversized eyes and tiny pink tongues. They were making these soft, squeaking noises that served no tactical purpose whatsoever. And that's when I witnessed something that shattered every military analysis I'd ever written about human behavior. Captain Lisa Morgan, the same woman who had stared down a Vorthak war chief without blinking, dropped to her knees. Her voice, which had commanded respect across 3 sectors, suddenly became soft and, "Oh, who's a good boy? Who's a good little boy?" The other Marines, hardened veterans who had seen combat on 17 different worlds, clustered around the basket. Their weapons hung forgotten at their sides as they made these bizarre cooing sounds. "Sergeant Riley," Morgan said, still using that strange high-pitched voice, "signal the Defiance. We need an emergency medbay set up for, let me count, 6 puppies." Puppies. That's what they called them. Puppies. "Ma'am," Sergeant Riley replied, and I swear his voice cracked like a juvenile's. "Should I also request the emergency veterinary supplies?" "Affirmative." "And Riley, tell Chief Martinez to prepare the captain's quarters. These little guys are going to need constant care." I had to replay this transmission 17 times before I believed it. The human military, the same force that had carved through our defenses like plasma through tissue paper, had just diverted a dreadnought-class warship, risked the lives of 12 elite soldiers, and committed valuable resources to rescue baby animals that served no strategic, tactical, or economic purpose. Admiral Crick's tentacles had gone completely still when I showed him the footage. In Zephyrian body language, this indicated either deep thought or complete system failure. "Vorthak," he said slowly, "please tell me you have an explanation for this behavior." "I'm still working on that, sir. But the rescue mission was just the beginning. What happened next convinced me that humans might actually be the most dangerous species in the galaxy, precisely because they made no sense." The news of the puppy rescue spread through the human fleet faster than a quantum transmission. Within hours, every ship in their armada was requesting updates on the little ones. The humans had somehow managed to create a communication network dedicated entirely to sharing images and videos of 6 small canines. And the images, by all the moons of Zephyr, the images. Picture this. Admiral Sarah Jin, commander of the human Third Fleet, a woman who had outmaneuvered our best strategists in the Vega campaign, sitting at her command console with one of the tiny creatures sleeping in her lap while she planned our destruction. Or Chief Engineer Marcus Webb, the man who had jury-rigged a warp core explosion that took out an entire Vorthak battle group, carefully crafting miniature beds out of spare reactor components. The humans had turned their most advanced warship into a floating nursery, and somehow, this made them fight even harder. 3 days after the puppy rescue, the human fleet engaged our forces at the Titan Nebula. Our tactical computers had predicted a 73% probability of victory. We had numerical superiority, better positioning, and the advantage of fighting in our own territory. We lasted exactly 14 minutes. The humans fought like beings possessed. Their formations were tighter, their responses faster, their tactics more aggressive than anything we'd seen before. It was as if the presence of those 6 small creatures had awakened something primal in their warrior spirits. During the battle, I intercepted internal communications from the human ships. Instead of the usual military chatter, I heard things like, "Buster Squadron, you are cleared for attack run. Make those Zephyrian scum pay for threatening our furry friends. This is Captain Taurus." Remember, people, we're not just fighting for humanity today. We're fighting for Max, Bella, Rex, Luna, Charlie, and Daisy. They had named them. The humans had given individual names to 6 creatures that couldn't even open their eyes properly. But here's the part that really broke my understanding of human psychology. After the battle, when our fleet was scattered, and our admiral was drafting surrender terms, I monitored the human victory celebrations. They weren't celebrating their tactical brilliance or their superior firepower. They weren't gloating about their conquest or planning their next military moves. They were sharing more pictures of the puppies. "Look," I heard Captain Morgan squeal over the comm. Rex just opened his eyes, and Charlie took his first steps. The entire human fleet, these beings who had just delivered the most devastating military defeat in Zephyrian history, were reduced to excited babbling over the developmental milestones of baby animals. Admiral Crix found me 3 hours later, still staring at the intelligence reports with what I'm sure was an expression of complete bewilderment. "Vorthak," he said quietly, "in your professional opinion, as our leading expert on human behavior, what exactly are we dealing with?" I looked up at him, my 4 eyes blinking in sequence as I tried to formulate an answer. "Sir, I believe we are facing a species that becomes exponentially more dangerous when exposed to small, helpless creatures that serve no practical purpose. That makes no sense. Nothing about humans makes sense, sir. That's what makes them so terrifying. And I was right to be terrified because the puppy incident was just the tip of the asteroid, so to speak. Over the following weeks, as I continued my surveillance, I documented phenomenon after phenomenon that defied all logical explanation. Human soldiers would risk their lives to rescue injured animals from combat zones. Entire squads would delay crucial missions to help wounded creatures that had no military value whatsoever. I watched a human special forces operative crawl through enemy fire to save what appeared to be a small feline that had somehow ended up on a battlefield. The human high command not only tolerated this behavior, they encouraged it. Ships began carrying emergency animal rescue supplies alongside their standard military equipment. Medical bays were retrofitted with veterinary stations. Food replicators were programmed with nutritional profiles for dozens of different Earth animal species. But the most disturbing development came when I intercepted a transmission from Human Fleet Command. They were discussing something called Operation Fuzzy Thunderbolt. Admiral Jin, the voice of Fleet Admiral Catherine Santos, crackled through subspace. Intelligence suggests the Zephyrians are planning to target civilian colonies. What's our response? Ma'am, Jin replied, her voice carrying that tone that had preceded some of humanity's most devastating military campaigns. If they so much as look at one animal shelter, one pet store, or one single creature that can't defend itself, we glass their homeworld. Glass their homeworld. Complete planetary annihilation over pets. I quickly ran this threat through our tactical computers, cross-referencing human military capabilities with their psychological profiles. The probability that they would actually follow through on this threat came back as 97.4%. We were dealing with a species that would commit genocide to protect baby animals. That night I found myself standing in the observation deck of our intelligence station, staring out at the stars and trying to process everything I had learned. The humans had revealed something about themselves that was more terrifying than their weapons, more dangerous than their tactics, and more incomprehensible than their entire civilization. They had a weakness, but somehow, that weakness made them stronger. As I stood there, lost in thought, an alert chimed on my communicator. Another human transmission had been intercepted. I pulled up the data feed expecting more battle plans or strategic communications. Instead, I found myself watching Captain Morgan, giving what appeared to be a tour of the Defiance's new puppy deck to visiting dignitaries from the Human Colonial Authority. And this, Morgan said proudly, gesturing to a small, enclosed area filled with soft bedding and tiny toys, is where Max likes to nap. He's quite the sleepyhead, aren't you, buddy? The dignitaries, powerful politicians and military leaders who controlled the fate of billions of humans across dozens of worlds, were making the same cooing sounds I'd observed from the soldiers. Captain Morgan, one of the dignitaries said, a woman whose uniform indicated she held significant rank in the Human Space Command. How are they adjusting to ship life? Oh, they're doing wonderful. Lorex has learned to use the microgravity litter box and Luna figured out how to activate the automatic food dispensers. They're so smart. I paused the recording and tried to process what I was seeing. These were the leaders of humanity. These were the minds behind their military expansion, their technological advancement, their conquest of star system after star system. And they were standing in a converted cargo bay baby-talking to 6 creatures that served no conceivable strategic purpose. But then something else caught my attention. In the background of the recording, barely visible behind the group of officials, was a tactical display showing human fleet movements. And those movements were the most brilliant strategic deployment I had ever analyzed. While they were playing with puppies, the humans were simultaneously orchestrating a 3-pronged assault that would effectively cut off our supply lines to 4 different sectors. They were using the distraction of their apparent obsession with these creatures to mask military preparations that would cripple our entire defensive network. It was at that moment I realized the true horror of what we were facing. The humans weren't distracted by their love of small animals. They weren't weakened by it. They were empowered by it. Their desire to protect helpless creatures gave them purpose, motivation, and a ruthlessness that made their previous military campaigns look like practice exercises. I opened a communication channel to Admiral Crix's quarters. He answered immediately, his tentacles already moving in the agitated patterns that indicated high stress. Vorthak, please tell me you have good news. Sir, I said, my voice probably carrying more fear than I intended. I need to update our threat assessment of humanity. What's the new classification? I looked back at the tactical display, at the puppy videos, at the impossible contradiction that somehow made perfect sense. Sir, I recommend we upgrade humanity from dangerous military threat to extinction level event. And sir? Yes? I also recommend we surrender. Immediately. Because I had finally understood the truth about humans. They weren't just willing to fight for their territory, their resources, or their political beliefs. They would fight wars, sacrifice fleets, and burn down civilizations for the sake of creatures that couldn't even feed themselves. And that kind of motivation, that kind of absolute commitment to protecting the helpless, made them the most terrifying force in the galaxy. The puppies were just the beginning. Admiral Crix's response to my recommendation was, well, let's just say it involved a lot of colorful language that doesn't translate well into standard Galactic. The gist of it was that surrendering to humans because they liked puppies was possibly the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard in his 230 rotations of existence. How wrong he was, how magnificently, catastrophically wrong we all were. The surrender recommendation was filed under Analyst psychological breakdown, and I was assigned to mandatory rest cycles. But rest was the last thing on my mind as I watched the galaxy's political landscape shift like sand in a solar storm. Because while our leadership dismissed my warnings, something extraordinary was happening across human space. The puppy incident, as historians would later call it, had triggered what could only be described as a cultural revolution. Every human colony, every space station, every long-range exploration vessel suddenly developed an overwhelming need to acquire small defenseless creatures, hulks. The puppy incident, as historians would later call it, had triggered what could only be described as a cultural revolution. The human trade networks, previously focused on strategic materials and advanced technology, redirected their efforts towards something far more dangerous, interstellar pet adoption. Captain Elena Rodriguez aboard the merchant vessel Stardust contacted the human agricultural world of New Eden, the request that broke every economic model I'd ever studied. New Eden Control. This is Captain Rodriguez. We're requesting immediate departure clearance for a full cargo hold of puppies, kittens, hamsters, and something called guinea pigs. Copy that. Stardust. Priority shipping clearance granted. Safe travels. And give those little guys extra cuddles from all of us here on New Eden. Priority shipping clearance. Our pets. The humans were treating animal transport with the same urgency they'd previously reserved for military supplies. But that wasn't even the strangest part. The strangest part was what happened when the Regellian Consortium made the mistake of intercepting one of these pet transport vessels. The RCS Dominator, a heavy cruiser with enough firepower to level a small moon, stopped the human freighter Lucky Paws in the neutral zone between human and Rigellian space, standard piracy operation. Really, they boarded the ship, expecting to find valuable cargo they could ransom back to human space command. What they found instead were 347 small animals from 17 different species, and one very angry human crew. Now I should mention that the Lucky Paws was a civilian vessel, unarmed transport, skeleton crew of 12, no military escort. Under normal circumstances, they would have surrendered their cargo and negotiated for safe passage. These were not normal circumstances. Captain Jake Thompson, a middle-aged freight hauler with absolutely no military training, looked the Regellian boarding party commander straight in his compound eyes and said, "You are not touching these animals." The Regellian commander, a seasoned warrior named Grix9, laughed. Actually laughed. "Human, you are in no position to make demands. Surrender your cargo and prepare to be boarded." Thompson's response entered the historical record as one of the shortest declarations of war in galactic history. No. What followed was, well, calling it a battle would be generous. It was more like watching a natural disaster unfold in slow motion. The 12-person crew of the Lucky Paws, armed with nothing more than cargo handling tools and apparently unlimited rage, proceeded to systematically dismantle a military boarding party. Thompson himself tackled the Regellian commander with a cargo lifter, screaming something about nobody messes with Mr. Whiskers. His engineer, a woman named Beth Park, weaponized the ship's atmospheric recycling system to flood the cargo bay with sedative gas while she rescued a crate of what appeared to be small reptilian creatures. The entire incident lasted exactly 7 minutes. When it was over, the Regellian boarding party was unconscious, their equipment was confiscated, and Captain Thompson was broadcasting on all frequencies. This is the lucky pause to any human vessel. We have successfully defended our precious cargo against hostile boarding action. All animals are safe and accounted for. The response from human space was immediate and overwhelming. Within 6 hours, the lucky pause had an escort of 47 warships. Within 12 hours, the Regalian Consortium received a formal declaration of war from the Human Colonial Authority. The reason for the declaration? Attempted harm to innocent creatures under human protection. Admiral Crix called me back to active duty immediately. Vorthak, I need you to explain to me how a freighter full of pets just started a war. I pulled up the intelligence files, though by now they were becoming disturbingly thick. Sir, based on my analysis, the humans have developed what I can only describe as a collective protective instinct toward small creatures. Any threat to these creatures is perceived as a direct attack on human territory. That's insane. Yes, sir. That's what makes it so effective. Because the Regalian War, as it came to be known, was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. All the humans didn't just fight to win territory or resources.
Why this?
They fought like beings whose very existence depended on the safety of creatures that served no military purpose whatsoever. And they fought brilliantly. The Battle of Kepler Station was a masterpiece of tactical coordination. Admiral Sarah Jin commanded a fleet of 86 ships against a Regalian defensive force nearly twice that size. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a strategic disaster. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting in enemy territory. But Admiral Jin had something the Regalians didn't account for: motivation that bordered on religious fervor. All ships, this is Admiral Jin. Her voice crackled across the fleet communications. Intelligence reports that Kepler Station is holding approximately 2,000 civilian pets as hostages. Our mission parameters are simple: retrieve every single animal and ensure their safe return to human space. Ma'am, came the response from Captain Williams aboard the destroyer Thunderbolt. What about the Regalian defenders? Jin's pause was exactly long enough to send chills down my sensory apparatus. Captain, you are authorized to use any means necessary to complete this mission. Any means necessary. The battle that followed redefined the concept of overwhelming force. The humans didn't just attack the Regalian positions, they obliterated them. Ships that had served the Regalian military for decades were reduced to scrap metal in minutes. Defensive installations that had withstood siege warfare for centuries crumbled under the human assault like sand sculptures. But here's the part that still keeps me awake during rest cycles. Throughout the entire battle, human medical ships were standing by with veterinary teams. While their warships were turning Regalian vessels into expanding clouds of superheated plasma, their hospital ships were preparing to treat traumatized pets. The humans won the battle in 4 hours. They spent the next 3 days carefully evacuating every single animal from the station, providing medical care, psychological counseling, and what they called comfort therapy. I watched the evacuation footage with morbid fascination. These were the same humans who had just delivered the most devastating military defeat in Regalian history. And there they were, sitting on the deck of their medical ships, gently petting small creatures and making soft, reassuring sounds. Captain Maria Santos of the hospital ship Mercy was recorded saying to a small feline that had apparently been injured during the battle, "It's okay, little one. You're safe now. The bad people can't hurt you anymore." The bad people she was referring to were a military force that had controlled 3-star systems and commanded respect throughout the sector. Now they were reduced to bad people who had made the mistake of threatening pets. But the real turning point came when the Galactic Council finally decided to intervene. The Council, you see, had been watching the human expansion with growing concern. Their military victories were impressive, certainly, but they followed recognizable patterns of conquest and expansion that the Council had dealt with before. This was different. This was a species that was willing to go to war over creatures that contributed nothing to their economic or military power. This suggested a level of irrationality that threatened the established order of galactic politics. So the Council made a decision that, in hindsight, ranks among the greatest strategic blunders in recorded history. They decided to test humanity's resolve by targeting the source of their apparent obsession. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. A joint task force from 5 different Council species would conduct a police action against human-animal transport networks. They would confiscate the creatures, relocate them to appropriate facilities, and demonstrate to humanity that their expansion could not continue unchecked. The operation was called Rational Solution. I tried to warn them. I sent 17 separate intelligence briefings explaining why this was possibly the worst idea in the history of bad ideas. I provided statistical analysis, psychological profiles, and tactical assessments that all reached the same conclusion. Do not, under any circumstances, threaten human pets. The council dismissed my warnings as alarmist speculation based on insufficient data. Insufficient data. 20 rotations of studying human behavior, and they called it insufficient data. The Joint Task Force launched their operation on what humans call Tuesday. They targeted the human colony of Greenwood, a peaceful agricultural world that specialized in breeding and caring for domestic animals. The colony had no military installations, no strategic resources, and a population that consisted primarily of families who had chosen a quiet life surrounded by creatures they loved. Perfect target for a police action. The council reasoned, minimal human military response, maximum psychological impact. The task force arrived in the Greenwood system with overwhelming force, 200 ships from the 5 most powerful military organizations in the galaxy, against a civilian colony with a defense force consisting of 12 patrol craft and an orbital station that was used primarily for animal quarantine procedures. The humans didn't even try to fight. They transmitted unconditional surrender within minutes of the task force's arrival. The council forces landed on Greenwood and began their operation. They systematically collected every domestic animal on the planet: dogs, cats, horses, rabbits, birds, reptiles, even fish from ornamental ponds. 17 different species of earth animals, plus dozens of creatures that humans had adopted from other worlds during their expansion. The human colonists watched in silence as their pets were loaded onto council transport ships. Men, women, and children stood in their doorways, tears streaming down their faces, as soldiers carried away creatures that had been part of their families for years. The council commander, a Lautarian general named Vex Prime, transmitted his final report to council headquarters with obvious satisfaction. Operation Rational Solution completed successfully. All target creatures secured. Human population offered no resistance. Recommend immediate implementation of similar operations throughout human space. The council received this transmission at 14:30 Galactic Standard Time. By 14:45 they were receiving reports of human fleet movements from every major sensor station in the galaxy. Because here's what the council, in all their strategic wisdom, had failed to understand: the reason the colonists of Greenwood hadn't fought wasn't because they were weak or cowardly. They hadn't fought because they knew something the council didn't. They knew what was coming. Human Fleet Command had been tracking the council task force from the moment it entered human space. They had watched the operation unfold on Greenwood with the patience of predators waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. And when that moment came, when the last transport ship lifted off from Greenwood carrying its cargo of terrified animals, humanity revealed why they had conquered half the galaxy. The human response came from 17 different directions simultaneously. Elites that had been conducting routine training exercises throughout the sector suddenly converged on the council task force with precision that suggested months of planning. Admiral Catherine Santos, commanding the human 8th Fleet, opened communications with the council task force on a wide-band frequency that every species in 3 sectors could monitor. Council forces, this is Admiral Santos of the Human Colonial Authority. You have committed an act of war against the civilian population of Greenwood. You have 30 seconds to release our people's family members and surrender your vessels. General Vex Prime responded with the kind of arrogance that had served the council well for centuries. Admiral Santos, you are outnumbered and outgunned. Withdraw your forces immediately, or face the consequences. Santos's reply became the most quoted military communication in galactic history.
General, you just made the biggest mistake of your very short remaining life. You took our dogs.
What followed wasn't a battle. It was an extermination. The human fleets didn't just attack the council task force, they systematically disassembled it. Ship after ship was disabled with surgical precision. Their crews taken prisoner, their vessels captured intact. The humans wanted the animals back unharmed, and they were willing to demonstrate exactly why nobody should ever threaten creatures under their protection. The engagement lasted exactly 1 hour and 43 minutes, holes when it was over. The pride of 5 galactic civilizations was floating dead in space, and 200,000 council military personnel were in human custody. But the humans weren't finished. Oh no, they were just getting started. Admiral Jin transmitted a message to council headquarters that redefined the concept of psychological warfare. Honorable Council members, we have retrieved our family members from your custody. All animals are safe and receiving appropriate care. However, we feel that some clarification is needed regarding humanity's position in galactic affairs. The message continued with a detailed list of every Council military installation, government facility, and strategic resource within 50 light-years of human space. The accuracy of the intelligence was so complete that it included floor plans, security protocols, and personnel rosters for installations the Council thought were completely secret. As you can see, Jin's message concluded, "We have been monitoring your activities for some time. We generally prefer peaceful coexistence, but recent events have forced us to reconsider our position. Any future actions against human civilians, human territory, or any creature under human protection will result in the complete annihilation of your respective civilizations. This is not a threat. This is a promise." The message was delivered simultaneously to every government in the galaxy.
Hey.
Within hours, the political landscape had shifted permanently. The council that had ruled galactic affairs for millennia suddenly found itself reduced to a collection of species begging for mercy from beings they had vastly underestimated. But the most remarkable part of the entire crisis came afterward. Once the animals from Greenwood were safely returned to their families, once the council forces were processed through human detention facilities, once the treaties were signed establishing humanity's dominant position in galactic politics, what did the humans do? They threw a party. Not a military victory celebration or a political rally. A party for pets. Every human ship in the sector contributed to what they called the Greenwood Reunion Festival. The celebration lasted for 3 days and included activities I had never seen in any military context. Pet shows, training demonstrations, and something called agility competitions where small creatures ran through obstacle courses while humans cheered with enthusiasm that bordered on mania. I watched Admiral Santos, the woman who had just redrawn the political map of the galaxy, sitting on the grass of Greenwood's main colony square, playing with a small canine that kept bringing her a stick. Every time the creature returned the stick, Santos would throw it again, and both she and the animal seemed to derive inexplicable joy from this repetitive, purposeless activity. Admiral, one of her staff officers, approached with what appeared to be an urgent communication. "Ma'am, the Zephyrian Empire is requesting immediate peace negotiations." Santos looked up from her stick-throwing game, considered the message for approximately 2 seconds, then said, "Tell them they can wait. Rex needs his exercise time." Rex. The fate of interstellar diplomacy was being delayed because a small dog needed to play fetch. That's when I finally understood the true horror of humanity's position in the galaxy. They weren't conquerors in any traditional sense. They weren't building an empire for resources or territory or political power. They were creating a safe space for creatures that couldn't protect themselves, and they were willing to destroy anyone who threatened that safety. The galaxy had learned humanity's weakness. They cared about small, helpless things with absolutely no strategic value. But in learning this weakness, we had discovered something far more terrifying. That weakness made them stronger, more dangerous, and more ruthlessly effective than any military force the galaxy had ever seen. 3 months later, I submitted my final intelligence report to what remained of the Zephyrian High Command. The report was exactly 1 page long. Recommendation: immediate and unconditional surrender to human authority. Alternative: extinction. The High Command accepted my recommendation without debate. We became the 17th species to voluntarily join the Human Protective Alliance, an organization dedicated to the safety and well-being of all creatures throughout the galaxy. And you know what? Life under human protection isn't so bad. Sure, we had to restructure our entire society around something called animal welfare standards. And yes, our military budget now includes mandatory allocations for veterinary services. But we're alive. More importantly, we're part of something larger than ourselves. Last week I was transferred to the new Galactic Animal Rescue Service, a joint organization that coordinates emergency response for creatures in distress throughout human space. My first assignment was helping to evacuate a group of Andromedan crystal moths whose habitat was threatened by solar flare activity. As I watched human volunteers risk their lives to save creatures that most species would consider barely sentient, I realized something profound. The humans hadn't conquered the galaxy through superior firepower or advanced technology. They had conquered it through something far more powerful: the absolute refusal to allow harm to come to those who couldn't protect themselves. And somewhere in the depths of space, on ships and stations and colonies throughout human territory, Millions of small creatures sleep safely, completely unaware that their simple existence has reshaped the political structure of the galaxy. The humans call them pets, the rest of us call them the reason we're still alive. Because the galaxy learned humanity's weakness, and in doing so discovered that sometimes a weakness can be the greatest strength of all.